Think you know Scotland? Think again. Think innovation. Think big data. Think the data capital of Europe. Think artificial intelligence. Think robotics. Think world firsts. Think world-changing technology. Think having the energy to create change. Think all electricity supplied only from renewable sources.
From space, Scotland's technology is reversing the devastating effects of cocoa farming on the forestry of Ghana.
Scottish research is helping find an effective treatment for Parkinson's disease.
Think business. Then think low taxes. Think lower living costs, but think higher quality of life. Think well-connected. Think making connections. Think transforming and disrupting industries. Think breaking the mould. Think you need a break? Think being surrounded by all this, the most beautiful country in the world. Think about getting away from it all, just a few hours drive away. Think health. Think healthcare. Think healthy lifestyle. Think style and substance. Think new experiences day in, day out. Think education. Think talent. Think access to the most educated workforce in Europe, including 4 of the world's top universities. Think potential. Think reaching it. Think surpassing it. Think using our thinking to change the world. Not waiting for someone else to step up, but leading the way and changing the game. Think having the nerve to scrap ideas and go again until it's better. Then better again, and again, and again. Think of a country hungry for the next challenge, next problem, next opportunity, and ready to take on the impossible. Now, think of your business, your future, your opportunities. Think of what Scotland could do for you. So, what do you think of Scotland now? Think different, think Scotland. Scotland is now.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Michaela Sullivan from the Scottish Property Federation, and we're here to consider the question, why is the Green Agenda so important for Scotland? Scotland's programme for government seeks a just transition to a net zero future. Its aim is to support investment to bring new jobs, transform the heat energy efficiency of buildings, and rapidly accelerate decarbonisation. Businesses and organisations in Scotland are recognising that transition to net zero is no longer an aspiration, but an imperative. We have a diverse and informed panel here today who will share the investment and real estate sector's ambitious plans to grow the Scottish economy while driving towards net zero. After our speakers, we're going to move into a question and answer, and this will be done using the chat function. So if questions come to you whilst our speakers are speaking, please feel free to put them into the chat function straight away so that we can get off to a flying start with the questions once we've heard from our speakers. First of all, I'm going to ask Kat Feldinger from the Scottish National Investment Bank to share with us Scotland's economic growth strategy, its ambitious plans in the drive to net zero, and how the Scottish Government, cities and regional stakeholders will enable this transformational investment agenda in the lead up to COP26. Kat, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michaela. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kat Feldinger. I am the lucky person in charge of the startup of the Scottish National Investment Bank from the Scottish Government's perspective, but also range more broadly across investment finance and making sure that we create some good conditions for an investment-led recovery. And coming into today, I was really thinking about I mean, we're used to meeting each other like this, but genuinely this still is pretty unparalleled. We're sitting in the middle of the confluence, essentially, of 3 different crises, one of which is around sort of climate change and the conditions it creates for instability. We've had forest fires in the Arctic, a twin-headed storm, the hottest decade on record. The second, sort of the rise in conditions that gives for pandemics. If you listen to all the wise epidemiologists at the moment, they will say that not only are we quite lucky to have escaped probably 9 similar pandemics to the one we're living through in the last 20 years. We might have to be that lucky again in the next 10. So sitting over all of that is a sort of a condition around distrust and tribalism. And so thinking about how you have an economic strategy, a strategy for any kind of recovery, and that I think you have to start with the big conditions that you're looking to achieve. And for me, ultimately, and for those of us who are working on this within the Scottish Government, a huge amount of what that comes down to is resilience, which isn't about getting it perfect, but which is, if you look at the dictionary definition around sort of bounce back ability, changing shape, essentially around adaptability, or if we're going to borrow from a titan around climate change at the moment from Mark Carney, adaptability or dieability, there is just no choice in this anymore. And so when I'm thinking about resilience and how we build resilience into an economic recovery and into the kind of society we want to create in Scotland, there's three different ways to look at that, I think. There's one around knowing who we are, there's one around not being afraid to use it, and there's one around not being afraid to try new things. So if I take them from the top and how they relate to what we're doing at the moment, in terms of knowing who we are, we've just published a trade vision that makes absolutely clear that the way that Scotland acts in the world is consistent with who we are and how we define ourselves as a nation. So if we believe in the race to net zero, if we believe in getting that right, we're going to stop things like trade support for our oil and gas sector. If we believe in human rights, we're going to pick our investment partners carefully. We're going to do this really, really consistently, thinking about who we are. In terms of the second type of resilience and not being afraid to use that, I think that's where this becomes really interesting. So I have been a civil servant now for about 15 years, and I don't think I have ever in my life seen the level of policy coherence we have around these things. So from the climate change plan to the housing strategy to the work that we're doing around FDI, the sectoral support, the supply chains work, all of that is effectively understanding what Scotland is really, really good at, that those are the things we're good at because we care about them, and that we care about them because they speak to who we are. So there's a set of progressive, innovative values in there that give us some real sectoral strengths and some real strengths and depth and talent around um, data and digital, around health and life sciences, which you'll hear more of later, no doubt, from Anna, around advanced manufacturing and around that change to net zero and to low carbon. And what we're increasingly doing across the range of policy instruments that we have in the Scottish Government is not being afraid to use that. So you've got a planning system that's lining up around enabling development and thinking about master zones and what that looks like. You've got a tax and incentive environment that is helping to stimulate investment, making sure that when an investor or developer takes a risk in Scotland, we're there to support them. You have got capital and inward investment plans that are looking to actively engage with markets around those sectoral strengths, understanding that they're what drives demand into our economy, that they're where our future lies. And you've got a whole series of other developments around, as I say, housing strategy, sectoral plans around climate change that are all driving us towards that same direction. And the third area of resilience, I think, is sort of distributing this model a little bit. So what I've spoken about so far sounds really quite centralized, like government's done some clever analysis, aren't we brilliant? Actually, the real trick in how we deliver this is working together in a completely different way. So rather than thinking that government can go it alone, we're increasing our capital investment, but we're not the only ones that are going to need to do that in order to achieve what we need to see. How do we think about major challenges for a sector like real estate and the challenges that climate change and COVID and all of these things bring, without simultaneously thinking about the opportunities? So if the built environment at the moment is one of the biggest emitters, then in its reimagination and reconstruction lies also one of the absolutely biggest opportunities for all of us, for us in achieving the net zero future and well-being led future that we want, and for you in getting all the support that you would need in order to develop a different kind of real estate in Scotland, one that is energy efficient from the start, where it stacks on top of heating networks and master planning zones that kind of enable that sort of joined up thinking, links to transport systems. We also can't think about this without thinking about the kind of devastating impact that COVID has had on city centres, which do drive a lot of demand. So if we're thinking about how we bounce back from that, you can't really do that without thinking about the number of assets we are going to be left with in city centres that are going to need repurposing. In there lies a different opportunity as well. The way that we go back from this isn't a route back to what was, it's an active desire to try and create something new. And I guess our offer in that to the rest of the world is around the scale, the size of who we are as a country. We're relatively small and you can get hold of us, but we're big enough to have some big and bright ideas. I think the video has stolen most of my thunder on that. And we are absolutely open to working with the private sector and to working in different ways. So you will hear much more about what this feels like on the ground from the rest of our panelists. And I very much look forward to working with you in this full years in the run up to COP and over the course of today's discussion. Michaela, back to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Kat, for that. We're now going to go to Anna Stamp, and she's going to tell us about the plans for the Edinburgh Bioquarter and the investment opportunities it's created for the city. Anna.
Good morning. Just checking that you can hear me. Had a few technical problems at the start, so
we can hear you, Anna. That's great.
And very pleased to join you this morning. So here to spotlight Bioquarter, an incredibly exciting project, and we're on the cusp of launching one of the UK's largest procurement exercises on our search for a private sector partner, picking up from what Kat said. The Bioquarter currently governed by 4 dominant organisations in Scotland, and we're on the search for a 5th private sector partner who's going to bring investment, expertise and development really to push Bioquarter forward. So if you could go to the first slide and the next one. Great. And really it's what I'd like to do first of all is just to talk a bit about what Bioquarter actually is today. It's a fairly early site. It's developed over the past 20 years. We have developed about 70 acres of land to date. It's dominated by the Royal, the city's main hospital, and also the university's medical school. So we already have 2 significant anchor organisations there, as well as, if you go to the next slide, an ecosystem which is in its infancy, and really does need to expand and grow and accelerate at pace in order to push Bioquarter forward and onto a global platform. So this slide just shows you some of the tenants and companies that currently are located at Bioquarter in our triple helix site. So if you go to the next slide. So Bioquarter, if you go to the next slide, Bioquarter, we're very much at a tipping point right now. As I say, the site is very interesting. It's grown up over the past 20 years, and it really is a science park in some respects. And it has all the benefits of the science park. It has an amazing pool of talent and facilities and accommodation. However, it lacks that connectivity that a site needs. It lacks a critical mass of people. It's dominated by cars, and talking of the green agenda, its carbon approach really has been building by building to date. And if we continue on that transaction, I think Bioquarter will be fine, but what will happen is it will start to slip behind the other sites across the UK, and it will not unlock its full potential as we see it. So the plan is to develop the remaining 61 acres of land through a public-private partnership, and really utilising Scotland's expertise that we already have in health technology, data and life sciences, and really accelerate Bioquarter forward. Edinburgh, with the city deal funding that's come to the city, is really positioning itself to become the data capital of Europe. Significant investment already going into Edinburgh on the data research, data-driven research. And we're very proud that actually their HQ, the Usher Institute, will be built in the next 2 years at Bioquarter to really take already an amazing site and really push it forward. So the next slide, please. And what we want to do, and our vision, is to transition Bioquarter from what it is today as a science park into Edinburgh's health innovation district, and create a real global destination for pioneering health innovation. We want to take the site, we want to grow it into a new neighbourhood of Edinburgh, an urban neighbourhood with a critical mass of people, a really buzzing and thriving environment, and a really exciting place to work. But also the most important bit is the introduction of a more mixed use environment. And if you go to the next slide, you can start to see how important that we're putting place into actually achieving our goals. We want to create a place, a really vibrant place, a place where people want to live, they want to learn, they want to work. But it's also is an important element within the local community. So we don't just want it to be a gated community, we want it to reach out, we want it to be part of the regeneration of some of the surrounding areas. We see it really as a significant growth in terms of jobs, but also skills as well, reaching out to the local schools. Also, we want the site to have be an absolute exemplar for its green credentials. We've got targets for net carbon zero. We have wellbeing targets. We really want it to sit high on that agenda as well. It's all about health innovation at BioQuater. So we absolutely should be making that within the site, as well as the work that goes on the site. The next slide.
Anna, that's pretty much the 5 minutes up. So if you can sort of head to the conclusion, that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. So you can see here just the mixed use of the site, the development land that is actually still available for developers. And if you move to some of the final slides, and the next one, and really just to kind of finish on what the market opportunity is, you can start to see the undeveloped site, the potential that BioQuater has to be developed. Our master planning demonstrates that there is a capacity for circa 4 million square feet of development capability on the site. And we will look at that from a mixed use, from health innovation, residential, retail, hotels, all sitting under the umbrella on health innovation. So I'll stop at that point.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Anna. We're now going to move on to Nick Penny from Savills, and he's going to share his view on the investor sentiment towards Scotland. And from a real estate perspective, what is the most appealing and unique about its investment proposition? Over to Nick.
Thanks, Michaela. Yeah, I mean, Scotland is unique, as we all know, in many ways, and I think Kat picked them out. We're very, very small, but punch massively above our weight, I think, in many ways. But from a real estate perspective, the fundamentals that attract investment into real estate in Scotland have been there and have been consistent for a long time. We've got a stable political system. We've got a very robust and long-established legal system. Your full repairing and insuring leases are almost unique in a global context, where the responsibility for looking after property sits with the tenant. We do have relatively long leases, again, compared to many other jurisdictions. We've got, and actually property provides a very attractive income return relative to most other asset classes just now. On top of that, you can gear against property, so cash on cash or IRR driven returns are much more achievable, and also much more attractive, again, certainly in the current environment with historically very, very low levels of fixed income. And a lot of real estate obviously has underlying alternative use values. From a Scotland perspective, we've got a very strong national identity as a country in our own and as part of the United Kingdom, and we definitely benefit from that. We've got strong tourist trade. There's massive entrepreneurialism from Scotland and innovation, as we've seen from the video at the start, and also from what Kat said and Anna's just covered there just now. And interestingly, you know, going forward, and even over the recent years where we've had disruption, I guess, through COVID, obviously, but also uncertainty that we always get round about general elections, local elections, and all these types of things. There has been an interesting consistency in approach into investment in real estate in Scotland over the last 5 years, particularly. Two things particularly. The increase in overseas investment into real estate in Scotland, and that has changed very much since the global financial crisis. And the 10-year average of overseas investment to Scotland real estate was about 40%. That's increased to over 50% as a 5-year average. and the overseas investors have replaced the UK institutions who were the drivers of the bulk of investment into the market in Scotland over the longer term. And actually, there's also been a real focus on mixed use development. So playing into what Anna's just said there, you know, the BioQuarter undoubtedly is focused around life sciences, but ultimately it is a fantastic mixed use development. You know, there will be residential, there will be leisure, there will be retail, there'll be education, there'll be culture, there'll be amenity, there'll be all of these things that are important in terms of creating meaningful and purposeful places. And that's what we see, you know, the exemplars of King's Cross down in London, you know, which is built around a very key transport hub with a station there, but everything that's built around about there has been unbelievably successful because it has been a hugely diverse community. And I think going forward, that is where Scotland can really continue to attract a lot of investment into the country. We have always been, you know, embraced diversity and been very inclusive, and I think we need to continue to do that. And with all that being focused and around the S as part of the ESG agenda, where there's been a huge focus on the environmental impact. And again, as Kat has said, you know, the real estate environment contributes about 40% of carbon emissions between embodied carbon and operational carbon. And a lot of that real estate will still be here in 30 years' time. We need to find a real sustainable way of dealing with our real estate going forward. So that we don't continue to contribute as much carbon emissions to the environment as we do just now. But going forward, huge opportunities. We come out of the pandemic for all the reasons we talked about. And like Kat, I think that the video at the start of the presentation really highlighted the incredible opportunity and what we can contribute to the wider economy from Scotland.
Thank you very much, Nick. And finally, Sindhu Krishna from the Phoenix Group is going to share her key priorities when looking at sustainable investment opportunities and answer the question, how does Scotland's approach compare to other regions you are investing in? Over to Sindhu.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Very pleased to join you all. I was just checking that I've come off mute. I think it's continuing to be the most used line of this year as well. Hopefully that'll change in the very near future, but delighted to be here. I'll start by introducing who Phoenix is, and then come on to this very, very important topic. So Phoenix is UK's largest long-term savings and retirement business. We have about 14 million policies with about 323 sterling billion of assets under administration. We have a huge presence across the country, so we have a footprint throughout the UK, and we have Standard Life Assurance, which is a brand which I'm sure a number of you on this session are familiar with, so it's part of the Phoenix Group. And through Standard Life Assurance, we have a huge presence in Scotland, and that's kind of a sizable portion of our staff as well in terms of the footprint across UK. Now, sustainability is a key strategic pillar. It's hugely important for us in Phoenix. I represent the investment function, but it's the same across all areas of the business. It's a key area of focus for Phoenix. Now, from an investment perspective, Kat brilliantly talked about resilience in the introduction. So that's one of the main focus, to make sure our portfolios are resilient to risks and are going after the opportunity. And where we are moving is not looking at environmental, social, and governance considerations from an ethical perspective, but as a key contributor or key source of risk as well as opportunity. So at Phoenix, we're committed to responsible investment. So that means that we are looking at every investment, we're looking at the environmental, social, governance risks, how that impacts our investment process, and also acting as responsible stewards of the money that we manage. And again, we work very closely with our asset managers in this regard. And we're just not only looking from a risk and resilience perspective, we're also looking at opportunities. We invest for very long term. So we're long dated, we're what is called a patient capital. So to give an example, again, this is one of the different areas in how we invest. We've got a huge breadth and depth in terms of the products, the range of products that we offer. Last year, 18 months back, we invested about 40 million in operating wind farm just off Dumfries and Galloway. That's just one example of the kind of renewable energy projects that Phoenix is doing. And again, this is we lend across the S, the social housing, we lend to local authorities. So we have a huge portion of private assets, investments, long-dated investments. And this is where it's not just about the risks, it's about risks and opportunities as well. In addition, I'd just like to also bring in, the pledge. Phoenix has committed to net zero. We are again similar to a number. I'm sure a number of people on this call are very familiar with that. And again, I think here I'll just come back to the question at the beginning in terms of the opportunities. This is not just about us committing to an end target. It's about moving from where we are, the transition, and the huge amount of opportunities that it brings about. Now, last in September, led by the Scottish Government, there was an announcement of green projects, close to 1 billion, with more coming. So it's, and Kat talked about the partnership that's required with private sector. So I'm coming from the other side to say there is a commitment, there is a pledge, there's this intentionality to transition the portfolio from a risk, from an opportunity perspective. And it's about joining forces and hearing more and working closely with governments and other initiatives just to see where the pipeline is, where the project is, and how the private sector can contribute to this very important agenda. Back to you, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Sindhu. Right, the chat function is open for questions, so please feel free to put questions into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll open with the question. I think this is probably best directed to Kat. What are we doing to attract the right kind of private sector, corporate and industry partners who would be ideal collaborators for the opportunity of green investment in Scotland?
It's a great question, and I don't think that there's a straightforward answer. If you look across the spectrum of both investment need and opportunity that there is in Scotland, you have to look at the way that, again, back to this kind of concept of creating resilient systems, that different demands drive each other. So if you get a good inward investor in, they need a space to go in. If you need the space to go in, then you're likely to need the talent. The talent will need the housing, and all of that will drive a sort of a collective baseload, essentially, for the new types of green infrastructure that we need. And so the honest answer to that is that the people that we need to work with are, first of all, investors and developers and companies who are as interested as we are in changing how we do business, that the opportunity isn't different from the risks in a sense. There's a kind of a real meeting in the middle of saying the way in which we do things matter. That can be the technology and the companies that lie behind that, and they will need a specialized class essentially of venture and equity firms to help support them. We've obviously got the new Scottish National Investment Bank that can co-invest around some of those things. For some of the bigger changes, I mean, I was looking at the numbers for the heating network the other day, where our estimate is that we need 6 billion per year by 2030, and for the next decade after that, just on the heating networks in Scotland. So getting up to that level, frankly, will require people like Sindhu, actually, who are willing to come in with us and think about, if you look at a city like Glasgow, for example, in the run up to COP, what are the technical options around not just heating grids for individual areas of the city, but literally for the whole city? How do you start to design that, do the technical feasibility on it, structure it as an investment deal that enables people like Sindhu to put different pots of money that they're in control of? 323 billion doesn't all just sit in one bucket. So understanding a little bit of when and how that needs to get deployed across different areas, I think is the kind of the partnership that we're really looking for and open to.
Thank you, Kat. If we can ask Anna now, how will the Edinburgh Bioquarter help push forward the Scottish Government's plans to be net zero by 2045?
So sites like Bioquarter have a real responsibility here. And, what we don't want is to come in, build it quick, and just have a kind of quick turnaround in terms of infrastructure and money. The partners themselves, the 4 partners, already have ambitious plans and they're within their own organisations, and it's really pulling that together and making sure that our 5th partner brings expertise to actually deliver it. It's a site like Bywater as well is tricky because it's not a greenfield site. I mean, it already has significant infrastructure in there that's been built over the past 20 years. So a lot of it is already obsolete or doesn't meet what we would say is current requirements for a building in order to meet these new carbon targets. So how do you stitch an old site with a new site together to actually achieve a grand ambition? And I mean, we certainly don't have all the answers. The Bywater will be developed over the next 10, 20 years. We will see a lot of turn of technology in that period as well. And I think sites like Bywater have to be seen as exemplars. They also can be seen as test beds for new innovative ideas as well. But I think what they can't be seen is in isolation. And what we can't do is sort of put a red line around Bywater and say, well, here's Bywater's plan, here's its sustainability targets, here's its own strategy. What we need to do is link in with everything else that's going on in the city and make sure that we take a citywide approach to these types of things. If you take energy and energy provision as a key one, you know, do sites continue to actually install their own energy infrastructure for that site, or actually do we join up and do we have a more joined up approach to the City of Edinburgh with fewer energy solutions, but lots of sites taking from that? I mean, these are things that have to they have to take place. There's discussion has to take place. And I think this is where the Scottish Government and the likes of CAT come in. It's about bringing the sites together and actually making people talk to each other and collaborate across all the kind of amazing things that's going across Edinburgh just now, whether that be residential, pure residential, or mixed use sites like Bywater, and really driving home the targets, delivering the targets as well, and not just having a great strategy that actually gets impacted by finances or commercial needs further down the line.
Thank you, Anna. We're going to actually have a follow-up question that quite neatly dovetails with what Anna's been saying. I think it'll probably be best answered by Kat, and it's what direction or instruction will be given to construction companies to ensure that new buildings are built with a green approach?
Thank you. So, I mean, I think there's a bit of carrot and a bit of stick going on there, isn't there? The stick in terms of the fact that that standards are being tightened, building regulations, etc. I think we're probably much less scared of that than we were in the past, and much more definitive about things like phasing out gas boilers and thinking about you know, what kind of level of insulation is demanded in new builds. But in using those sticks, I don't think that it's that we should disregard actually how much change is happening within the industry itself. So the carrot, if you like, is probably around the innovation and the enabling side. So we've got a construction innovation centre that is working with a lot of companies on the way in which they construct, the way in which they build, to take out some of that embodied and operational carbon. And we are also looking at things like using the public sector estate as the baseload in a kind of a cradle to cradle database. So where can you find recycled materials? How can you again take some of that embodied carbon out of the sector? So lots of different approaches. I don't think we'll see a straight switch into from where we are at the moment into passive house. But I do think that there's a lot of willingness to work on individual sites and test different approaches, and if they work, then start to roll them into regulation.
Thank you, Kat. The next question, I think maybe we'll go to you too, actually. Scotland is starting to focus on community wealth building as a route to levelling up and addressing inequalities. What is the international capital investment perspective on this agenda?
So, so given that we move around as civil servants, you might be interested to note that I used to work on the community wealth building agenda, so I don't actually think they're that far apart at all. I think, again, a huge amount of this comes back to how many different incentives and how many different good benefits you can build in. So there is a way in which you can seek investment. You can seek investment into standing stock, for example. It changes hands, and actually it doesn't fund it. It's good for propping up the capital stack. It's not that good for getting an overall economic development benefit. Or you can look at working with people like Anna on a project like BioQuarter, where they're talking about porous borders, how it spills over into the rest of the community around it, around the method of construction. And then the third thing I think that you absolutely have to do is look at the supply chain and where that's located. If you're serious about community wealth building, and we're serious about wanting to be able to do, for example, low carbon construction, we'd better make sure that we're supporting the companies in Scotland that can deliver on that as well. So a lot of this work ends in investment, but actually it starts in completely different places around having the right projects to work on and having the right supply chain companies.
Thank you, Kat. Continue to feed your questions in, folks, through the Q&A box at the bottom. The next question, I think this will go to both Nick and Sindhu. So I'll ask the question, and then perhaps if Nick could offer his perspective, and then Sindhu could add hers. What should Scottish stakeholders be making key priorities to attract international investors? Nick first, please.
Thanks. Yeah, listen, I think this session is very much about sustainability and the wider green agenda, and I think undoubtedly we are seeing this being front and centre for most major investors now. If you look at Blackstone, the biggest investor in the world, they are actively divesting their interests in businesses that are no longer on the same green agenda that we should all be on, frankly. You know, the stakeholders in this journey to net zero and the wider ESG agenda is everybody, individually, corporately, public sector, private sector. Everybody should understand the importance of this. And actually, when big corporate businesses such as Blackstone are putting ESG front and centre, you know, we're seeing all of our clients, both domestic and international, now having ESG and sustainability very much as part of their investment committee decision-making process, which is a huge change over a very, very short space of time. ESG has been around for a long time, as we know, but where it sits just now, and from a Scottish perspective, you know, COP26 this year, arguably the most important meeting on the planet that there's ever been, you know, since the Paris Agreement was made, and the opportunity for us to sell Scotland and to remind everybody that we as a country have got ESG as front and centre at every level, you know, from the individual level right through to government, I think will help us attract overseas investment, because it is an agenda that is very much front and centre for everybody just now.
Thank you. Sindhu?
Thanks, Michelle. And I would very strongly echo what the sentiment from Nick in terms of this is at the center of, or these considerations at the center of investment committees. And there is definitely a lot of investors who are extremely keen. There's lots of money going after these green projects. And, you know, to the extent we have got terms like greenwashing, just to make sure we kind of differentiate between the projects which are truly green and ones which are not. So it goes back to Kat's point, which is the project. So we have got the intentionality, we've got investors around the globe, countries, cities, investors, private investors, especially in the run-up to COP, all committing to sustainability, committing to climate and the transition, but also need the projects to come in where this money can be invested in. And I think it's also important that we are mindful of the different risks, the level of risks that these investors are able to take, because you have their end obligations, like ours, is to make sure our customers, our policyholders are secure. So we have got certain investment obligations for them. So they are fundamental. So there is kind of how much risk, what is the project, what does this actually mean for my client, for my customer? So those questions have to be understood. The project has to be understood. So it's that building that bridge where there's an understanding of the projects, where the money needs to be invested, and also understanding of the level of risks, the kind of money that these investor base is able to put in as well. Again, right from retail investors to institutional investors, that's a huge piece. We even see, pension funds being, there's loads of campaigns for people to put their pension money, make sure they're asking the questions of where their money is going, how that money is invested. So there's voice from across the base, from retail to institutional, the varied sophistication of investors who want to do this, but it's making sure the pipelines is there, it's genuine, and it's genuinely bringing the change, and is structured, is put together in such a way that it's attracting, it's the right kind of investors it wants to come in and invest in their projects.
Thank you very much for that. The next question, I think, will go to Anna, please. And this is about how the original buildings from the BioQuarter will be upgraded to align with net zero targets. What the partnership should look like for achieving that, and who would fund it?
I think that's a really, it's a sort of $1 million question for the site. As I say, if we were dealing with a brand new site, we would be able to actually deliver our targets, a lot easily. We have a huge existing stock, including hospital sites as well. So it's not easy. However, we are dealing with 4 public organisations who, as I said, they all have their own sustainability targets and strategies as well. So there will have to be retrospectively going back into these buildings and actually improving the building's infrastructure to make sure that they meet these targets for the site. How that's funded, I mean, I think that's a question because it doesn't come cheap, and often there's hidden costs in a lot of these things. Just drawing on my experience on another site, it's not BioQuarter, where we installed an energy centre and retrospectively did work in existing buildings, only to find that the radiators actually across the entire stock were not suitable for what we put in. So in fact, it wasn't just a quick plug-in of the old buildings, it was a kind of rip out of major infrastructure across the building to actually make it compatible. And I think that's the challenge. It's these challenges are we are able to overcome them, but they come at a cost. And I think that's going to be a real challenge for the partner organisations and current funding of public organisations just now. But I think it's about being upfront about these costs. It's going into it with your eyes open. And knowing that this is what's going to happen. I think Nick used a really interesting, it's a journey. We're not going to do this overnight. This is a site like BioQuarter is going to take the next 20, 30 years to grow and be developed in its fullness. So, there is time. We have to keep an eye on technology and the evolution of technology as well. So I think I mean, I'm answering the question, but I suppose from the funding perspective, it's very difficult to suggest how that is funded just now. And I think these are hard conversations that need to take place at government level.
Thank you. A crunchy question next, which we will direct to Kat as our Scottish Government representative. It's clear that there's a possibility of significant political change in Scotland this decade. In the event that Scotland leaves the UK, is there a clear path to EU membership?
Isn't that the $1 million question? So I guess if you don't mind, given that I'm a civil servant and sort of speaking on behalf of government, actually I'm going to completely duck that and tell you a slightly different story instead. I'm originally from Denmark, and I've lived in Scotland and in the UK since I came over as a student and forgot to go home, essentially. And so for me, one of the things that is weirdly reassuring about the level of uncertainty that is caused by things like Brexit and by things like the potential for further constitutional change within the UK, it is a kind of a certainty, a feeling I have being in Scotland, that if Scotland were to go independent, it is doing so in order to become part of the rest of the world again. And that's a kind of a slightly shady way of putting a huge amount of effort around remaining aligned with a lot of the European values and regulation that's coming out. We've just finished up some really good conversations with the European Investment Bank on how we can continue to work with them, sort of regardless of all the noise that's going on. And it is also quite reassuring that actually on many sides, a lot of that is considered noise. I know it will feel very, very real for companies that are trying to export through the situation that's going on at the moment. I think it's really encouraging to see the UK government seeking some realignment, essentially, of the criterion and longer transition periods for it. So is there a clear path? There's certainly a body of law that pre-exists because it has been written from within the EU. There is increasingly, I think, a willingness from other EU member states to look at what is happening in the UK very, very seriously, to look at what's happening with Northern Ireland, what's happening with Scotland, where the vote was not in favour of leaving the EU. And while I haven't got a definite answer, what I will say is that the messages that we're hearing are very, very different than they were 5 years ago. 5 years ago, there was lots of Commissioner Barroso saying, well, we couldn't possibly talk about it. And there was lots of things around Spain saying no. We aren't hearing that anymore. So it remains an absolute desire and commitment on the behalf of the Scottish Government to seek EU membership if we were to go independent. Whether the path is as straightforward as that, I'm minded to quote another international soul, Angela Merkel, and say, wir schaffen das. I'm sure we will find a way.
Thank you. The next question, another one for Nick and Sindhu. We'll reverse the order this time. Sindhu, you can have first bash, and then we'll hand over to Nick. Is Scotland large enough, and does it have enough possibilities to draw big investment, to draw big investors to come and invest in Scotland PLC?
I'll approach this two ways. One is Phoenix. From a Phoenix perspective, our largest footprint is in the UK. As I said, we've got a strong presence in Scotland. So given all of our liabilities, using a more technical word, is in the UK. We're looking across the UK for opportunities. We clearly have a global portfolio, well diversified, but also looking to invest in different opportunities closer to at home. So absolutely. So Scotland presents great opportunities. As I gave an example of wind farm, we've done more projects like that. But I think what we are here is co-creating opportunities when organizations, the private sector, as well as the governments have committed to star targets, have committed to trajectories, and have plans at sectoral level, which I've seen from the government. So it'll be great to see what the projects are, what the underlying changes, how we're going to change. And as those pipeline of projects comes through, that's where we work with governments across the cities, councils at different levels to see how private investors can join forces. And again, we just not only lend to the individual projects like the infrastructure projects, we also lend to councils, we lend to local authorities, and we've been doing that for some time now. So this is also funding some of the other projects they may have. I'll take another example. We talked about buildings. So from a Phoenix perspective, we have an equity release mortgage portfolio. So that's where the point about individual homes, what can be done there. So there's loads of possibilities, but it's about converting the possibilities into plans and how we actually can move jointly to transition. So again, given taking example of Phoenix, there's a breadth, there's a depth, but it's making sure what is possible in each of those different buckets of assets, the pools that we have, is where we'll have to work together in terms of where the government commitments are as well. Hope that helps.
Thank you.
Sindhu and I haven't shared notes on this at all, but I would agree with what she was saying. I think the question is, is Scotland large enough, and does it have enough possibilities to draw big investors? Well, yes. I mean, there's some great examples. BioQuarter it will be a very live one. That'll be £1 billion worth of investment. Edinburgh St James is £1 billion worth of investment. That's the bulk of that has come from overseas, from APG, a Dutch investor. and Nuveen, who are an overseas fund management business, so investment from overseas there. I think going forward, the opportunities, if you take, for example, social housing, if you look at the upgrade of social housing stock in Scotland across all of the regions, there's huge opportunity there, and also a massive social responsibility opportunity there to fund those types of investment. Infrastructure, we talked about King's Cross. I think in terms of Scotland, improving our transport infrastructure would provide a great opportunity. Anna talked about it almost at a sort of micro level, in relation to the connectivity for BioQuarter. But I think that example of building meaningful and purposeful places, infrastructure forms part of that, whether it be energy infrastructure, transport infrastructure, or whatever. So, very much I think Scotland is big enough, and there are huge opportunities for meaningful investment into the country at many, many different levels.
Thank you. Another investment question, this one probably for Kat. Is there a need to better coordinate infrastructure provision and investment in Scotland to enable green development? For example, the electricity network will need significant expansion in order to decarbonise heat.
So, I mean, in a word, yes. So there's a huge amount going on this already. The Scottish Government's capital spending plans for the next 5 years are about to be published. I want to say in about a week's time. For the first time, that is raising our public sector spending levels to the OECD average. So that's an extra £1.5 billion a year going in from the government. And that totals then 33 billion over 5 years. So there's a huge amount of investment from the government going into this, covering infrastructure, so covering things like digital, covering things like roads, like rail. An area like the grid is slightly more complicated. So I would absolutely recognise that there's an issue. And one of the things that we have to deal with in a Scottish context is that that's reserved. I think where we've come at this from a sort of an energy needs perspective previously, what we're now seeing within the government is a kind of a greater sophistication. So we are engaging, for example, with Treasury and with the Department of Energy and Industry and Science around their net zero reviews and strategies. We expect there to be more to come out of those in terms of how we fix the grid. But obviously our aim in that is thinking about the capacity constraints we have in Scotland, in particular, the capacity constraints and the costs around linking new renewable developments into them, and how we sort of get those fixed first, because actually that, with the capacity we have in Scotland, the potential capacity, and with the new ScotWind leasing round coming up, that has transformational potential for all of the UK, not just for Scotland. So making sure that we're kind of sharp enough to get ourselves up the agenda in the UK, as well as fixing what we can from our side.
Thank you. I think we'll take one final question, and I think this is probably best directed to Sindhu. Could you tell us more about the level of risk that you understand that green investors are looking for?
The word risk is very strong, but I will play this in another way. So this is again, it depends on the block of business. So we've got a range of products available, but also there is a different the amount of regulation that these different blocks of businesses are subject to. There are both the PRA, the FCA regulations as well. So we would look at the block of business to say what is the credit analysis, which is, what is this project, look at the amount of risk, look at the return, and then say, is this structure compliant with the kind of risk framework or the more overarching regulatory environment in which we play in? Is this secure? Is this cash flows that we're going to get, the investment that we're going to get, the returns that we're going to get, aligned with the amount of risk or with what we have promised to our customers, our commitment, our obligations, and is it secure enough for to give us that stable cash flows that we have committed to our cash flows? So breaking it down more simply, how secure is this opportunity? Is this compliant with the overarching regulatory requirement? Is this giving enough return for my customers, for my commitments more broadly?
Thank you very much. Right, well, we're getting towards the end of the seminar now. So just by way of summary, obviously the Scottish Government has identified via CAT that Scotland is a resilient country, and we've identified what Scotland is good at, sectoral strengths and depths of talent, and also that Scotland is increasing capital investment. In terms of the Quarter, there are significant opportunities for future investment with a potential for further 4 million square feet of investment, as well as the activity that's already taking place at the Quarter. Nick has told us that Scotland is a good place to invest in real estate. We have long leases, a stable legal system, and we're developing meaningful and purposeful places here in Scotland. And Sindhu has represented very clearly for us the huge presence of investment in Scotland, in sustainability being a very big focus within that investment, and patient capital being invested for the long term in renewable energy, social housing, and so forth. So overall, a very positive picture has come out of this morning. Thank you to all the panelists. And to the London Real Estate Forum for hosting this event today. And thank you also, audience, for your very interesting and insightful participation via the questions that you've asked this morning. Just before you leave, the London Real Estate Forum has a poll which is going to appear on the screen, and they would be very grateful if you would just complete the quick questions that are there for a couple of minutes before you leave to enable them to work on future sessions and what people would like to see. Thanks, everybody.